This evening's program, Domestic Abuse, Coronavirus, and the Courts. I am Debbie Wiedinghoff, the president of National Council of Jewish Women, the Chicago North Shore section. Thank you for joining our webinar. Please note that everyone is muted to minimize any feedback noise. Please feel free to write your questions and comments in the chat. And if you haven't already, take time to introduce yourself in the chat, where you're from, and say hi to everyone else. And I'm going to do one little shout out to Anita Weinstein. Nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Though we have all been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic in some way, the stay-at-home orders imposed during this time have left many victims of domestic violence more vulnerable and unable to connect with support services. It has also changed how the courts handle domestic violence cases. We are excited to have Judge Megan Goldish with us this evening to share her insights on this. Before I turn the evening over to Sherry Petlin, our Director of Violence Against Women Initiatives, and Judge Goldish, I want to take a moment to tell you about NCJW program dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence. Our Luggage for Freedom program provides a sense of dignity to women who are staying at or transitioning out of domestic violence shelters by giving them a suitcase packed with some personal and household items. Each year we pack on average 200 suitcases, as well as about 100 backpacks for their children, and deliver them to 9 local shelters. So to learn more about Luggage for Freedom and how you can support our efforts, please go to Luggage for Freedom at ncjwcns.org. In addition to this, NCJW coordinates a domestic violence court watch program. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Sherry Petlin, who will explain a little bit more about Court Watch and then tonight's program. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see you. Old friends, new friends, court watchers, and interested parties. Court Watch was formed in 1999. The Court Watch program of NCJW Chicago North Shore is ongoing at the Second Municipal Court of Cook County in Skokie. Staffed by NCJW trained volunteers, its mission is to advocate for needed services for DV victims and families, and to contribute an impartial assessment of the efficiency and effectiveness of DV court, as well as the quality of its judges and courtroom personnel. Quarterly reports are given to the chief judge of the courts, who reviews and assesses comments. We are there to make sure that justice prevails for the victims of domestic violence. We are an invited, respected presence in the courtroom and are committed to a fair judicial process. Of course, our presence is now confined to Zoom sessions and the accompanying restrictions that are needed in times of COVID. While we as court watchers have observed many sessions in the Skokie DV courthouse, we have not seen proceedings at the DV courthouse in Chicago. Therefore, we're very pleased to have Judge Megan Goldish present an overview from her perspective as the DV judge in Chicago. Judge Goldish, welcome and proceed.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to try and do a PowerPoint share screen for you, so bear with me. Okay. Oops, give me one moment. Sorry, can everyone see me flying through these slides?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, they're going on their own. Okay. Okay. We're getting there. Okay, sorry about that. All right, can everyone hear me okay? Yes, all right. Thank you for letting me come and speak to you. Those are wonderful programs, and I'm really honored to be here speaking to you. This is a very important topic. Basically, what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you an overview about the laws of domestic violence. I'm not going to delve too deeply into the nuances of the law. I know I'm not speaking to a law class, but I do want to talk to you a little bit about the effects that the pandemic has had on DV. Also, there are many categories of people who fall under the Domestic Violence Act: siblings, brothers, grandparents, et cetera. But what I'm talking about today is what's known as intimate partner violence. So I'm really going to be focusing on paramours, people who are married, who have or had a dating relationship. At the end of my presentation, I will include some resources. And if you need some further information or resources, feel free to contact me through Sherry Petlin. So a little bit about me and how I came to be involved in the domestic violence community, as well as how I came to know about the National Council of Jewish Women. I grew up on the North Shore of Chicago. I attended Niles West High School. Yes, I'm a brunette. That's me on the left, which is also, some of you might know, the home of Bart Connor, Olympic gymnast, and Merrick Garland, our presumed Attorney General. After that, I went to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And just so you know, the girl who's still a brunette down there, she is one of the other few Jewish judges, female Jewish judges in Chicago. That's Lori Rosen. She's an associate judge in the Domestic Relations Division. After that, I went to the Northwestern University School of Law, and it was while at Northwestern that I had an externship at the state's attorney's office. It was the first time there was a domestic violence unit, and at the time it was in the now non-existent 1340 South Michigan building. For if anyone has ever been in that building, if you worked there, you would have the strongest calves because the elevators never worked and the courtrooms were on the 6th floor. I spent some time studying at Cambridge University in England. That's me with Prince. And actually I worked at a DV shelter in Cambridge. It was eye-opening because this is a worldwide issue, domestic violence. And it was also there, by the way, it was the first and only time in my life that someone told me that I had a beautiful accent. So apparently a Chicago accent is the equivalent of the Queen's English. I subsequently became an assistant state's attorney here in Cook County, and I eventually worked in the domestic violence division. At some point, I became the supervising attorney of the Wings Call. Some of you are probably familiar with that. It expanded. It had originally been for women and transgender individuals in need of specific services, and it expanded to include women and transgendered individuals who were charged with nonviolent felonies, usually prostitution, to get drug treatment, job training, education. And a lot of these women were trafficked. And that is how I became to know the National Council of Jewish Women, because as many of you know, that is one of the missions of the council, is to eradicate human trafficking worldwide. And I attended a conference with the then state's attorney, Anita Alvarez, and I was so impressed with the council. They really were organized. They were dedicated to their mission. And quite frankly, I was very proud as one of the only Jewish state's attorneys, I think in general, but certainly in that specific division. I was really proud of the work the National Council of Jewish Women had done. And through that, I met some really impressive women who many of you know, including Carol Levine, Donna Gutman, and of course, Sherry Petlin, who brought me here today. Isn't that a nice picture of her? I was elected to the bench in 2014 and was thankfully just recently retained. And I sit in the Domestic Violence Courthouse. This is located at 555 West Harrison. As beautiful as that picture looked, I assure you the building does not look that pretty in the daylight. 555 is known as the Triple Nickel. It's a unique courthouse in the sense that it does felonies, misdemeanors, civil and criminal law, and issues restraining orders. And by the way, if you're wondering where it is, so here it's like Harrison and Jefferson, which is right down the street from Manny's Deli. That's Jerry Seinfeld eating there with Steve Harvey, by the way. And it's been said that like some non-preventable illnesses, domestic violence does not discriminate. So people from all backgrounds, ages, religious, ethnicities, socioeconomic, background, sexual identities, races, it does not matter. Everybody is affected. And I can assure you, I've had people from all walks of life appear in front of me. As I was mentioning, 555 is somewhat unique. Here's civil and criminal, and both types of cases are governed under the Domestic Violence Act. And in that building alone, there are advocates, both civil and criminal, attorneys, probation officers, pro bono legal services. You'll see there's Metropolitan Family Services, Ascend Justice, Lifespan has an office there. There's a kids daycare room, and we have our own bond court, our own felony preliminary hearing room. We do not have a restaurant or cafeteria, which is part of the reason I referred to Manny's earlier. So there are a few different types of restraining orders that exist under the law, and all of them are issued from this building. So the types of restraining orders of protection are for people who are in a domestic relationship, with some of the relationships I referred to earlier. Then there are the no stalking orders, the violence in the workplace restraining orders. Civil no contact orders are for people who are victims or survivors of certain sex charges or sex crimes. And these are not criminal charges, these orders, but a violation of it could be. What becomes important is they're all entered into the LEAD system, which is a nationwide law enforcement system. Orders of protection are good across all state lines. They're good in US territories and on Native American lands. So if you had an order of protection against somebody that was issued out of Cook County, and you were in New York and saw the person and an incident of domestic violence occurred, the order of protection is good. Who's going to prosecute it would be between the two jurisdictions, but it is good across state line. So as I mentioned, the law of domestic violence encompasses many areas of the legal system, and including, it does have some federal consequences. I just wanted to refer to that. There are definitely immigration issues and something called the public charge rule, which you might know. It's similar to back in the day when the government didn't want someone to emigrate here and then immediately be given free public services like welfare or healthcare. So they used to require a sponsor. That's no longer the case, but again, the immigration policies are ever changing in our country. So there's of course concern for some people about using any type of public service. And this could sometimes be an extra concern in a relationship, like a domestic relationship, where maybe there's a disparity in immigration status. So for example, if there's an abusive boyfriend who's a citizen and the girlfriend is not, it may be just one more concern that the girlfriend may have beyond language barriers, et cetera. And convictions under this code, or even under the issuance of an order of protection, if there's no conviction but an order is issued, somebody is prohibited from having a FOID card or a firearm. The Domestic Violence Act itself is different than almost any other act in the criminal code. It is, to my knowledge, the only one that tells the judges they should liberally construe the act. And it's the only one that I've seen that actually acknowledges that there's been a pattern of escalating violence, which frequently culminates in intrafamily homicide. It's very rare that you'll see in the criminal code under the charge, it'll tell you what some of the consequences are. As you know, so we're at the beginning of 2021, there have been some new laws that have been passed. There is one law that was passed that was certainly relevant to domestic violence victims. It kind of tweaked the law that it was before. It was sponsored by, some of you know, Laura Murphy, who's a state senator from Des Plaines, and it's Senate Bill 399. So addresses can be omitted from documents which are filed in court if disclosing the address would put a person at risk, which is pretty much what the law was before, but it expanded it because now safe houses can be kept private, and you can have a substitute address for public records or IDs, because that seems to be where if somebody wants to find you, you could be found. And that seemed to be a way where people were getting it. So the other issue that we were having during the beginning of the pandemic, especially, is getting somebody served with an order of protection. So I can issue orders of protection all day long, but if they're not served, then they're not valid. And if a police officer comes to an address and they say, well, I have an order of protection against this person, and the person says, I never received it, there's no arrest, there's no enforcement. So the Illinois Supreme Court noted, this is very difficult during a pandemic. They don't want people going to their homes. They don't want sheriffs going in and out of people's houses. So now if somebody appears in front of me on a Zoom call and that order is published to them, meaning either me or one of the state's attorneys or the public defender, and it could be emailed. They're considered served. As I mentioned, I'm not going to go too much into the domestic violence law, but as some of you know, particularly if you've been doing court, if you've been in court, domestic violence is treated differently than almost any other crime in the code. Also because it's a crime of recidivism, and it's one of the few crimes where the victim usually knows the offender. I would say sex crimes are also treated like that. But it's also, this is important because it's also one of the few areas in the criminal code where a court can take notice of the prior incidents of abuse if they're presented. So if you're coming to court and helping someone fill out a petition for an order of protection, you should include any past incidents in there. That could be really relevant. It also creates a paper trail down the road if something else happens. And also it lets the court know if this is somebody who might carry a gun. If I'll tell you the other thing that I learned very early on, I had someone come in. If someone comes in with a family member, do not assume that that person is in their support network. I had a woman come in, two sisters. They were close to my age. They were cute and bubbly and fun. They were both Polish. They're speaking a little bit in Polish, but mostly in English. Every once in a while, they would turn to each other, and they weren't raising their voices, and they seemed to be getting along. And there was a Polish-speaking police officer, I remember, who was sitting there, and I remember he was eating an orange. He was making a mess. There were orange peels all over the place, and he was doing it to try to get my attention. And he said to me, "You should know, the sister is telling her, go home, do not handle this in court. He's a good provider, like basically suck it up and take it." So, I mean, like live and learn. So when I spoke to her privately, it was a much different conversation than the conversation I was having with her while her sister was present. So I do want to talk to you a little bit about some of the statistics, and I'll be blunt. I went to law school because I'm awful at math, but you can get what the statistics are. They're pretty staggering. And keep in mind, most of what I'm telling you now are pre-COVID, and it is a severely underreported crime. It's been estimated that there's at least 4 incidents before someone even calls the police to report. And that's if they report. Even to their doctors, they're not reporting. And 57% don't even discuss it with anyone. And don't forget, I am referring again to the intimate partner violence. Again, look at 3 women per day are murdered by their intimate partner. And these are, by the way, this isn't worldwide, this is just the United States statistics. And here I would say that while everybody is susceptible, the most vulnerable groups were the women ages 18 to 24, across all races, equally vulnerable in terms of the people who come into the ER with violence-related incidents. Over a third of them are from domestic relationships, and women are 7 to 14 times more likely than men to report the partner violence. One of the things that got me is that over the past few years, there's been something like 1,200 to 1,500 suicides per year. The majority of them are men killing their intimate partners. I would say almost like 90-something%, and 57% of mass murderers have a history of domestic violence. You know, there was something I was watching on Gacy, and they were talking about Gacy grew up surrounded by domestic violence. I'm not saying Gacy is coming out of any of the homes, but it's just, it was a statistic that jumped out at me. Nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner, which is more than 10 million men and women per year. And again, I'm reminding you, these are pre-COVID. I included some additional statistics, which I thought were really telling, particularly the 20,000 phone calls a day placed to DV hotlines. But what jumped out at me, if you look down towards the middle of that slide, 19% of domestic violence involves a weapon, and the presence of a gun in a DV situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. And keep in mind, the purchase of guns during COVID has increased. I don't have any statistics on guns and DV during COVID yet. I'm hoping that I don't. And I'll tell you from a practical standpoint, the health costs have also increased. Women who are victims have an annual healthcare cost of almost $2,000 more per year than non-victims. So as I mentioned earlier, not one group is immune from domestic violence, including men. Most studies focus on female victims, but male victims there are about 3 million in the US every year. Most go underreported. There's some type of stigma. Some don't even realize they're being abused. What I thought was interesting in reading the studies is if I, as a woman, go into the hospital and I have suspicious looking bruises, right away I'm going to be screened for domestic violence by these mandatory reporters. But with men, a lot of them don't even get screened. Or if I start showing up with, strange bruises or acting weird, I may have family or friends who would intervene. But with men, they don't seem to do that. They don't even suspect this person as being a victim. And the other thing I thought that jumped out at me is sometimes they, not just in court, but victims they act more aggressively. I don't know if it's to overcompensate. I also have LGBTQ domestic violence victims. It's a community that has been hit very hard. The statistics in the transgendered and non-binary communities are slightly higher, but quite frankly, there was a dispute over what the statistics were. So I did not include them for today. If that's some information that you want, I do have some resources. But again, look at these with this particular community, the statistics are very staggering, again, considering that there are so many unreported. 44% of lesbian women and 26% of gay men have experienced physical violence. Some of the reasons that they were giving is it's a close-knit community. They're under intense scrutiny. They had cases recently in front of the Supreme Court. They didn't want it to affect certain rights. They were very reluctant to report it. It looks bad for the community. This is similar to anybody from any other community, going back to the Polish sisters who I had been talking to. Some of these other people indicated that they were concerned that they would not be treated fairly in the justice system. And in fact, that fear may be somewhat founded. In 2012, although I did note that the statistics have gone down as of 2018, but about a third of cases that went to law enforcement, the victim was arrested instead of the abuser. And so you can understand why someone may be concerned about reporting. So I listed here a number of reasons why victims don't report abuse. They're not exhaustive, but there are many barriers why someone might not. They might just be fear of retribution, fear of deportation. Again, the public charge. Maybe they want to remain together for their kids, or they are worried about being ostracized from their family. There are a number of religious barriers. People experience feelings of guilt. And for some people, what came out in a lot of the studies is they thought the person's not even going to be punished. They keep getting away from everybody covers for them. And if you look at the statistics with public figures, Major League Baseball, domestic abuse is prevalent in the NFL, politicians, athletes. Just looking within the last few years, the arrest rate was a little over half, and the consequence was a 1-game suspension. And between 2002 and 2014, of 64 reported domestic violence incidents in Major League Baseball, the NFL, and NBA. And if you think there were only 64 incidents, you'd be kidding yourself. These are the 64 reported. Only 7 players were punished by the league and only 2 by their team. I would say that some of these associations, in particular Major League Baseball, they've begun holding training sessions so that there are better defined codes of conduct, is the way I'll put it. And some of you in the Chicago area might know Pam Paziotopoulos. She actually was one of the founders of the domestic violence unit in the state's attorney's office. And she was a tremendous resource for me for statistics and for certain advocacy groups. She actually trains the Major League Baseball, NFL now, and NASA, and she's very busy. So I take that as a good sign. Domestic violence in general, most of you are familiar with the cycle of violence. Things are really great until they're not. And then there's that honeymoon period, I'm sorry. And these are just some of the ways that it comes up, physical, and you'll know on here I have male privilege. Again, while no group is immune, the majority of cases that are seen particularly in my courthouse, are with a male offender and a female victim. But again, that's not exhaustive when you consider you have 3 million male victims a year. And so just something to think about, even if somebody's being loving in the honeymoon period, don't kid yourself, because they are still exercising control over the victim. They know what they're doing. I had mentioned before you all came on, I was talking with Debbie and Sherry and Melissa that I often present this in conjunction with domestic violence in the workplace, although now most people's workplaces are in their home. But this has become a focal point of many domestic violence discussions because there have been mass shootings where the person is not a disgruntled employee. It's somebody who is in a bad relationship or had been broken up with by somebody who works at this place. And consider that domestic violence in the workplace, that these are the most dangerous calls for police because there are a number of people in there. And that if you're working at a place where somebody is a domestic violence victim, you too could be in dangerous way. Especially when you consider 71% of HR and security personnel had a domestic violence incident at the workplace. A domestic abuser, wants to control the victim. So they don't like the fact that maybe the victim's going off to work and has a life of their own, but it's really not that independent because the offender usually knows where the victim works, what their hours are, where they park their car, and where they can be found. So if there is an order of protection, or if you're helping someone who has an order of protection, you should make sure that they alert their workplace and give a copy of that order of protection to security right at the front door. Additionally, employed domestic victims, much like unemployed, have certain additional incidents. But if you look at the statistics, again, some of these jump out at you. The lateness, the trouble concentrating, that could be for anybody of a victim of any type of crime. But how often would you have the abuser then coming to your place of work? A lot of these people lose their jobs. They start making a number of phone calls to workplaces. I've had a number of emergency room nurses have come in and gotten orders of protection because they have to answer the phone. And to have somebody constantly calling like that, they just don't want, it's not worth having this nurse down here. She gets bad assignments. Sometimes they don't want to go into work, particularly again, if they work in the medical field, if they have bruises that they have to cover. From a practical standpoint, the cost is immense. Just from domestic violence, it's $3 to $5 billion in lost productivity per year. So the FBI put something together called a lethality assessment, or in terms of trying to consider, there's not really one single factor you say, oh, this person is certainly going to be a domestic abuser. But the more factors that are present, the more likely it is that they could act violently. But the most important is the victim's perception, because that victim knows the person. So maybe they're not being paranoid. You never know what goes on in someone's house. But looking at some of these lethality indicators, what was interesting to me is a lot of these are ones that serial killers also display. Particularly, they are violent, history of substance abuse, sex abuse as a victim or child. There was something, I don't have it included on here, where they're violent towards animals. But that kind of had jumped out at me. Some of you might remember about 2 years ago at Illinois Masonic Hospital, we had a very tragic incident. There was a doctor, Tamara O'Neill. She had been in an abusive relationship with Juan Lopez. They ended their relationship. She broke off their engagement, and he knew where she'd be working, and he knew what time she would be starting. So at 3:30 in the afternoon, he shows up in a hospital parking lot, a public lot, and he confronts her and says, I want my engagement ring. And of course, she's not walking around carrying around her engagement ring. So he shoots her. He shoots her 6 times. She was probably dead by the first or second shot, and he kept going. And then he runs into the hospital and continues this shooting spree. There's a pharmacy resident, Dana Less, from Indiana. She doesn't know either of them. I don't even know if she knew the doctor. She's just coming off the elevator, and he shoots her. And then there's a police officer, Samuel Jimenez. He shoots at the responding officer. And eventually he was killed by responding officers. Even though he tried to kill himself, he didn't succeed in that. And such a tragic accident. And then afterwards you look, well, what were the risk factors? And you look at this Juan Lopez, all this stuff starts coming out. The number of guns that he had purchased. He had threatened to shoot up the Chicago Fire Academy. I don't know if you remember, but all this information started coming out. He got fired from the fire department while he was in the academy. He didn't even make it to the point that he became a fireman. He owed a lot of child support. His ex-wife had an order of protection. And remember when I was talking about the petition where people fill out past incidents, she had a list of past incidents that he was sleeping with a gun under his pillow and that she feared for her safety. So a number of those risk assessment factors that the FBI was talking about had been on there. I just want to touch on quickly strangulation. People keep calling it choking. It's not the same thing. And by the way, I believe the word choking is the most misspelled word in police reports. It's constantly chocking, but the reason this is important is because it is a high indicator of future incidents of violence, and that often it does not leave visible marks, but it's truly one of the most severe types of abuse in the sense that it psychologically can cause stress to a victim. The abuser is showing the victim, I can take your life. It's been said that it might even take something like 7 seconds to choke off an air supply. I've been talking about physical abuse. Obviously, not all types of abuse is physical. I just listed some here, but there are certainly a number of other types that are maybe, this list is not exhaustive, but the humiliation, the control of the victim, teasing, segregating them, emotionally abusing them. There have been cases where courts found abuse when a husband made a wife account for every single penny she spent, literally down to the last penny and factoring in taxes. So you think to yourself, and he would sit there and make her re-add it over and over till she was able to account for every single penny. It is a form of emotional abuse. And I'm just thinking the stupid stuff that I've bought on Amazon alone during lockdown would have sent me into a tailspin on that. But I'll tell you, one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of during COVID are these fake DCFS calls. And it used to be there'd be a way to get a leg up on a custody case, et cetera. But when a DCFS call is made, DCFS workers have to come out and interview these kids. And sometimes they temporarily take the kids from the mother or the custodial parent. And it's really, they're very stretched, very thin. I think people should be charged. There is a law in the books for fake DCFS charge, but they are stretched very thin and trying to get to all these incidents of child abuse. Sometimes there are no signs of abuse, and sometimes there are obvious ones when you have bruises that don't match up with what someone's explanation is. But, if you're wondering if somebody is, do they have signs of anxiety? Are they distracted? Are they not showing up for work, or is their work quality changing? Are they missing out on family incidents? One of the things I noticed, a high absenteeism rate from work or from family events ends up being sometimes used against a victim in child custody cases. So the abuser's almost getting rewarded for abusing the victim. And then how do you see who an abusive partner is? Well, again, that can be very difficult to discern as somebody a domestic abuser, because some of these people are master manipulators. I've seen people explain away recordings of threatening phone calls or even eyewitness accounts of physical abuse. The other thing that's interesting in terms of the type of abuse, the majority of abusers are only violent with their significant other. Something like 80 to 90% do not have a major criminal record. But again, while there's not one factor, some of them do display some common characteristics, and I did list some on here, but the low self-esteem, they can be very pleasant and charming, and also, a lot of them have been known to display extreme jealousy or possessiveness, or even a sabotage birth control methods. They display cruelty to animals, or they're very verbally abusive to their partner. Think about if these behaviors are being displayed in public, what are they like in private? So think about if you've been in line behind people and you're wondering, or you've seen people at a parking lot going at it, it puts you in fear for what's going on at home with the privacy of their house. So you might be wondering, well, why does a victim remain with their abuser? Similar to many of the reasons why they don't report it. I listed some more. A lot of these are obvious, like economic, or they have no place else to go. Some of them say, well, I think that they're going to change. I want to stay for the kids. I feel very bad. I feel like it's a failure. I'm in love with this person. I can't leave them. I had to go to a training seminar in New Mexico, and they do this exercise where they gave all judges, and they gave us these like the fake money, and everybody was spread around the room, and they said if some of the money was could be used for hotel rooms, some of it could be used for a safe house, some of it could be to pay for an attorney, some of it could be to pay for child support. And then they did random things like if you're wearing a red shirt, put $5, you don't have money for a hotel. If you have blonde hair, and I answer to the blonde hair because today I'm blonde. If you have blonde hair, give another $10, you don't have money for a lawyer. And you start realizing the pressure, just the economical pressure on a victim. Sometimes, you know what, it's just easier. Can I take getting smacked around a little bit or screamed at? It's just easier. And it really, I have to tell you that exercise, it really stuck with me. And same reason a lot of victims don't fight back. Obviously, sometimes they're just maybe not as strong as their abuser. There were a number of incidents where people were saying they freeze. This happens sometimes to rape victims or sexual assault victims. They completely freeze and they say they come out of their body. Most of them don't have that fight or flight. And sometimes a lot of victims experience PTSD, similar to a soldier. I've been asked, well, what goes on? What about the kids, especially if they're fighting over the kids? These statistics, I hate to say it, are also frightening. It's a very depressing presentation. I apologize, but 3.3 million children per year witness their parents engage in interpersonal. And if there's interpersonal violence going on between their parents, it is 15 times more likely that there's also child abuse occurring. And a child who witnesses domestic violence is more likely to attempt suicide, abuse drugs, run away from home, commit crimes, be physically or sexually abused, or become a perpetrator themselves down the road. Under the Domestic Violence Act that I talked about at the beginning, it can be considered abuse if the child is present when the abuse is taking place, or if the child is put in a position where they have to jump in and protect one of their parents. Again, if you're helping someone fill out a petition for an order of protection, that could become important to let the court know that there was a child witnessing the abuse. There's a commercial. I'm going to show you a clip of a commercial. This completely stuck with me. It's from over 20 years ago, and I still remember it. I'm hoping you can hear it.
Where's dinner?
Well, I thought you'd be home a couple of hours ago, and I put everything away.
What is this? Pizza?
You had just called me. I would have known what.
Dinner ready is pizza.
Honey, please don't be so loud. Please don't. Let go of me!
Get in the kitchen!
No!
Do you want to see what hurts? That's what hurts! That's what hurts!
Oh, please. Please.
For information, call 1-800-END-ABUSE.
I don't know if that number is still good. That was from a very long time ago. So there was obviously an increase in domestic violence. The New England Journal of Medicine, which I read regularly, don't all of you, they called this a pandemic within a pandemic. And I thought that was a really apt description. During COVID-19, there was a significant increase. It was an estimate that 20% increase in intimate partner violence. That means an additional 15 million cases worldwide during the 3 million month shutdown. So they had estimated there were many reasons for the sharp uptick. I gave some examples here, and I think Debbie was very astute in discussing the victims rely heavily on advocates, and now their contact is virtual. It becomes it's a very stressful situation for a victim. There's a limited shelter space, both for someone who's accused or for someone who's a victim. So the accused person has no place to go. They're going to go right back home. And the hotlines had prepared for a number of additional calls. And the surprise was that the number of calls dropped in some jurisdictions by 50%. It wasn't that domestic violence was decreasing. It was just that victims are either unable to connect with their services, or mandatory reporters or interveners weren't getting involved. And the increase has been thought, though, has been worldwide. There was something like a 30% uptick in France, a 61% increase in Great Britain, a 20% increase in Spain. And I'll tell you what jumped out at me, 94% increase in reports in Colombia. between March and May of 2020. I don't know what that's attributed to. I kept going back and saying I must be reading it wrong, but it was 94%. The Johns Hopkins Journal of Medicine, which is of course another journal that I'm sure we all read. I mean, what else is there to read? They were saying that while domestic violence statistics haven't risen significantly, that the rate of murder-suicide, where a male partner kills a female than himself, has increased since the same time last year. This isn't surprising for anybody who's been stuck home. Divorce filings increased 34% between March and June of 2020, just March and June of 2020. The type of abuse has also changed, that we've seen social isolation and gaslighting. So I'm sure, I don't know if some of you know what gaslighting is, but it's a term that emanated from a 1938, 1940 play called Gaslight, where the husband tried to drive his wife crazy and have her question her reality by engaging in various tactics. And one of these tactics was he would dim the lights, which were then powered by gas, in their home. And when the wife questions, why are the white lights dimmed? It's like, they're not dimmed, you're losing your mind. And it's a very effective form of emotional abuse that causes a victim to start to question their own feelings, their instincts, their sanity. It gives the abuser a lot of power and control. I had a woman come in and say she had been gaslighted during COVID. And I was like, what are you talking about? And it was like bad fraternity pranks. She set the nanny cam and he was doing things like he was eating her leftovers and then throwing it away, putting the garbage outside, completely getting rid of it. So she'd come down. He's like, you ate it yesterday. What are you talking about? And but little things like that. He had painted something one color one night, painted a different color the next night. And so she started filming it because she thought she was losing her mind. Also, there's increased stress during the pandemic. So think about that, the stress of being home. It's more common in houses that are economically distressed. Everybody's losing their jobs. People are waiting for stimulus checks. And I will tell you the biggest factor is alcohol. So during the shutdown, sales of alcohol have absolutely skyrocketed, as much as 285%. So consider about alcohol. You can set up a safety plan with somebody. You can set up code words. You could get a list of resources, which I'm going to give you at the end, and bystander training. If someone you know is the abuser and they might need anger management or domestic violence counseling, I have some referrals for that as well. You can help them fill out petitions, and you can donate to places that provide free internet, shelter, clothes, etc. The suitcase charity that Sherry was discussing, I think that is phenomenal. I know a lot of you as Jewish people are familiar with Shalva. Thank God for Shalva, because they're one of the few places that in the area that have absolutely stepped up, especially during COVID. I've had people have a code word to like a family member. If they say birthday cake, call the police. Italy started a trend. All good things in fashion come from Italy, don't they? That domestic abusers and survivors can get free hotel rooms. And that's really important because a shelter may not accept somebody during the pandemic. Most importantly, if someone comes to you or you want to help out, do not judge or do not criticize. I talked about bystander involvement. There is an increase, and I'm going to show you some commercial clips, and then I'm going to end if people want to ask questions. But they are encouraging people to get involved, but make sure you get some training first. You don't want to put yourself in harm's way or exacerbate an already volatile situation. But don't underestimate the power of women sticking together. I don't know if it's an old wives' tale at this point, but I love it because I like the spirit of it. There was a story that came up out of the Cook County courts about 10 years ago. There was an Orthodox Jewish woman showing up to her book club covered in bruises, and her makeup was very obvious. So the rest of the women got together and they pooled their money, and they came to her and they said, you are going to be a statistic. We have a lawyer for you. We have a place you can go. She was from France. And they said, we have a place for you in Montreal, and you need to get away from him. He is going to kill you. And she said she wanted to get away, but he would not give her the get, meaning that she could be divorced in the American courts, but if she's going to go back into another Orthodox community, she can't start her life or date someone else until she has the get, has the divorce. So the women all got together and they all refused to go to the mikvah until her husband gave her the divorce, meaning that all these women's husbands could not have sex with their wives because they weren't going to the mikvah. All the men in the community got together and told him, give her the get. And again, I don't know if it's an old wives' tale, but it was something that someone had said to me because they're like, oh, I have an interesting case that I heard about, but I liked it because it was the spirit of women. So I'm going to, this is something that, this was a real call from Oregon or Oregon, depending what part of the North Shore you're from, but it's a commercial that the NFL used later on down the road in their commercial. So give me a minute.
A wrong call at first glance quickly turned out to be a call for help. Luckily for an Ohio woman, her 911 dispatcher was listening very carefully. Michaela Marshall has the story.
Oregon 911.
I would like to order a pizza at...
You called 911 to order a pizza?
Yeah, apartment.
This is the wrong number to call for a pizza.
No, you're not.
I'm getting you now.
In his 14 years of service, this is a call Oregon dispatcher Tim Tennick has never gotten before.
You see it on Facebook, but it's not something that anybody has ever been trained for. We're just trained to listen.
He says domestic violence calls are common, but not like this.
Is the other guy still there?
Yeah. I need a large pizza.
All right. How about medical? You need medical?
No. With pepperoni.
After this exchange, Tennick alerted officers to hurry.
Turn your sirens off before you get there. Caller ordered a pizza and agreed with everything I said that there's domestic violence going on.
Okay, then a lot of it is just them talking about the police response. This was the one that the NFL took and used during the 2015 Super Bowl.
911, operator 901, where's the emergency?
127 Brynmere.
Okay, what's going on there?
I'd like to order a pizza for delivery.
Ma'am, you've reached 911. This is an emergency line.
Large with half pepperoni, half mushroom.
You know you've called 911. This is an emergency line.
How long it'll be?
Okay, ma'am, is everything okay over there? Do you have an emergency or not?
Yes.
And you're unable to talk because...
Right.
Okay, is there someone in the room with you? Just say yes or no.
Yes.
Okay, it looks like I have an officer about a mile from your location. Are there any weapons in your house?
No.
Can you stay on the phone with me?
No. See you soon. Thank you.
And if you look at that commercial, they had a lot of, nobody actually was shown in the commercial. But you look, the house was destroyed. There were holes in the wall, and then you had the family pictures. So it was like seemingly a nice family. This was this is from Australia. Move up a little bit. Sorry, what did I do wrong? Here we go.
What the hell's this? It's what, Dad? It's a dress. Look, I know it's a bloody dress. What the hell's it for? You think I'm just gonna let you out of here wearing that?
What are you idiot? You're wrecking it.
I'm an idiot, am I?
What's going on?
You think I don't know what you're up to?
What do you mean? Stop it. What are you doing?
Who's gonna be then?
Who? I don't know what you mean. Please, just let go.
Stupid! No! Please! Tell us! Who is it? Who are you getting all dressed up for? Who the hell are you trying to impress? You're making me stupid. No. You're just making me. Now tell me, or you know what's coming next.
Thought you could use this.
Tommy.
It says do nothing and you may as well lend a hand. Oops. This is a bunch of public figures in
No more.
sports
It's
world
just a woman's issue.
and in Tennessee.
No more. Boys will be boys.
No more. What was she wearing?
No more. She was drunk.
No more. We don't talk about that.
No more. She was flirting with him.
No more. It happens all the time.
No more. It's not my problem.
No more. He just has a temper.
No more. She was asking for it.
No more. Not in this town.
No more silence.
No more violence.
No more bystanders.
No more excuses.
No more.
No
No
more.
more.
No more.
No more.
No more. He said he was sorry.
That was also shown during the same Super Bowl.
No more.
This one was from India during the lockdown. And these are all big Bollywood stars. I had actually asked my friend who loves Bollywood, and she recognized every single one of them, said it was like a big deal that they're all in one commercial.
During the lockdown, there has been a sharp increase
in the number of domestic violence cases.
To all the men we say,
Now is the time to stand up
against this violence.
To all the women we say,
Now is the time
to stand up and break your silence.
if you're a witness to domestic violence in your home,
please report.
if you're a witness to domestic violence in your neighborhood,
Report it.
If you're a survivor of domestic violence,
Report it.
report it. Report it.
report it.
Let's put a lockdown
On domestic violence. Let us put a lockdown.
On domestic violence.
Let's put a lockdown.
on domestic violence.
Let's put a lockdown.
On domestic violence.
And then finally, the last thing I have here. Oops. It's not letting me. There we go. It's not letting me go forward. Sorry, I know you don't want to see that commercial again, so I'm trying to. I don't know why it's not letting me. Let's see. Sorry, I was going to show you something from What's Love Got to Do with It. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it, where Ike's beating up Tina in the presence of everybody. But let's see if I can. I don't know. I have a list of resources where was really what I was ending with, which I can email those to. I can email those to Sherry. And one of the things that I thought was really, I know a lot of you know the YWCA is up in Evanston, but I have a list of hotlines. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way. Melissa, do you know if I want to exit out of?
Just click stop screen sharing.
There we go. Okay. So,
and Megan, I have a number of questions that if you have a few minutes, we could answer.
Sure. I, for some reason, don't have the YWCA in here. These are a list of agencies. Some are for people who are accused. Some are for people who are victims. If you need more, please feel free to contact me through Sherry. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay.
Okay.
There was a couple of questions that came in earlier, when people registered. And so I'm going to just go through a few of those and we'll see where we're at, if I can read them all. What motivated you to become a judge in domestic violence court?
I had originally, I was going to be an international lawyer. That was my whole plan. And when I was in law school and I did that externship at the state's attorney's office, it was a brand new division. And it was like, you could use the law to help someone. It was eye-opening for me. And I never looked back after that. That was what I wanted to do.
All right. What have been the biggest challenges of remote court proceedings?
I think some of it was touched on, that people don't have access to their advocates. I was telling Sherry I had something today where a woman was calling in remotely to get an order of protection, and we're on Zoom. There's a prisoner who's present on the Zoom call with their attorney, and all of a sudden she's asking for an order of protection, and the abuser comes up, he's driving behind her, and she's driving to the police with all of us watching on Zoom. It was such a panic situation, and the police officer stopped the guy. Everybody on the Zoom was clapping. I would say it was probably the silver lining that she had been on Zoom, that she had all these witnesses and all these people willing to help her. But for the most part, I think it's the isolation. I think we have a lot of people who are probably in danger and have no idea, or you have people who are maybe on the verge of becoming an abuser themselves. They don't have any strategies for dealing with stressful situations. And what could be more stressful than not knowing if you have health care, if you have money, if you have a place to live. So
there's a couple other here. What has been the impact of the election of a new clerk of the court on day-to-day court operations?
That's such a great question. I haven't seen anything change, except I have the world's most phenomenal clerk right now assigned to me. I don't know if that's because of Ms. Martinez or not, but if it is, I want to hug her. I have the best clerk. But right away, her name's been put on everything. Before, it used to be Dorothy Brown's was like stuck over whoever the clerk was before. But I don't know that she's been around long enough for me to see the difference.
I think, and one multi-part question, is there a plan and a date to safely reopen the domestic violence courts in Cook County for bench trials?
I had done a Zoom trial. I don't think that that's a good way to proceed for either side, but if people are insistent, I'm happy to accommodate. We keep getting these 3-week dates. Okay, are we ready to go to trial? Are we ready to go to trial? There's a chief judge order in place that says no in-person trials until further order of court. And I know they're inoculating people who are in custody, but they haven't inoculated any of the state's attorneys, only a few of the public defenders, and 0 judges. So I don't see that happening until the inoculations come through.
Going to be a while.
Yeah.
Yes. And the other part of the question, you might have answered this. Will there be accommodations for the public via Zooming or live streaming?
Yeah, you're all welcome to come and watch. It's a public proceeding if you want to Zoom in, but really what you'd be watching is what date should we get on this? Where are we on discovery? Because there aren't a lot of hearings going on, except for order of protection hearings, which are ex parte hearings. So you would hear what the victim has to say, and you'd hear a judge say they're going to issue an order or they're not going to issue an order. That's what you would be hearing. But yeah, it is a public hearing. You can get on the Cook County website, you can get the Zoom information. So the domestic violence courthouse has 4 criminal branches and 3 civil branches, and it's all listed under there. You can call in.
And when you were talking about not being a bystander, one question from Amy was, if you see strangers fighting in a public place and you think one of them is in danger, what do you do?
That's one of the, that's such a good question. And I have to tell you, I've been in that position where I'm like, do I do something? Am I going to make this worse for the person? What I ended up doing, I ended up like creating a distraction, like I spilled or did something stupid. It stopped them from fighting for now,
right?
But I didn't know what to do. And then I went to a bystander training, and because some of the problem is you call 911, now the police show up, and then you're as a bystander are not in court with this person. So the charges get dismissed and they go back. And now it's worse. They're mad that the police have been called, which is why that court, any court advocates that are so important. But some of the strategies they had given were, the same thing created distraction. Who knew I did something correctly? But they give you a number of scenarios and kind of suggestions on the, what they'll call right or wrong thing to do. The important thing is just not to put yourself in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, distraction sounds like a good idea. And Kathy Carmody asked, do you think anger management programs work?
I think the domestic violence programs, I do think work. The number of people who I have coming back in front of me after they've completed a domestic violence program is really low. I always ask people, where did you go for your program, especially when they're going to complete it? I think it's important, positive reinforcement. It's a hard program. What did you think of it? Do you feel comfortable going back and asking them for questions? Do you have strategies in terms of how to deal with these situations? I want them to do that. The anger management programs, though, that they're doing are these, they're 10 classes and they're on Zoom right now. So the interaction, I think, is really, the lack of interaction, I think, is detrimental. I've had people come back in front of me in the last 6 months to the point that I know their name before I even pull their file out, who've done anger management. I hate to say it, but that's the truth. It's the truth of it.
And we have one other question about the Illinois firearms restraining order.
Right. So I normally have done a presentation on that. That could be almost like a 3-hour, because it's a new law, that could be a 3-hour presentation on its own. But some of you might know, and I actually think the National Council may have had something to do with advocating to get this law passed. And it was 2018 or 2019, they passed a law, firearms restraining order. And so with that, it lists who can go in and ask a judge and say, this person is an imminent danger to themselves or to someone else if they have a firearm, because this is what's going on. It could be a parent doing it for a child. It could be a spouse, an ex-wife. And what's added to it that's different than an order of protection is a police officer can go in. And if I am, let's say that my son I know he has a gun and I know he's been making threats about something he's going to do to his ex-girlfriend, it puts the onus on me to notify the ex-girlfriend, I'm going in to get a gun restraining order. You are in danger. This is what he has said. And then I go in and I tell the judge, and I have to say, I couldn't get in touch with the girlfriend, but these are the efforts I made, or this is what I told her. And then the judge says, okay, I'm going to issue this order. And then there's a search warrant that's attached to it. And the police officers take the search warrant and they can go in and get the gun. They are only good for at the beginning on an emergency for 14 days. And then at total for 6 months. In the middle of the 6 months, after 3 months, if the person thinks it needs to be extended, they can ask for it to be extended for another 6 months. If the person who has it against them thinks that it shouldn't be, after 3 months, they can ask that it be dismissed. I will tell you on the orders of protection, if you look, it's like box 14.7 or something. There's something, it's not available for emergency orders. I can't go in and say, I need an order of protection against my husband, and I know he has guns. Can you take his guns? On an emergency basis, that's not available. But once I got an order of protection, I could have that on there that he has to turn his guns in. And that could be is good for 2 years, or even 2 years from beyond if he was convicted of something. Using my husband who's in the other room, like, but so I think from a strategic standpoint, it's really the imminent danger that controls. I've had one person come in and ask for it. It was a police officer. And it was because they were talking to they were off duty and they were hearing stuff going on. And I granted it, and they went in the search warrant and they took the gun. And as far as I know, that was the end of it. There were no charges filed, and but that's literally the only order that I've seen issued from the building. I think I'm the only one. But take a look, there's a whole act on it, and it lists who can get it. I think I have the site if people want the actual site. It's 430 ILCS 67. So 430 ILCS 67. And it's written in pretty plain language, which is how I can tell that non-lawyers wrote it. So
that's true. We don't have any other questions in the chat. I have one question. How difficult is it to prove and get a conviction on emotional abuse? Is that?
That's a great question. I think that's a little bit harder. I think it's easier for me to issue an order of protection if people have listed on this is what's going on, because it's only a preponderance of the evidence. And there are certain, like harassment. It's one thing if, you and I went out and you said, this guy's totally harassing me. But once you go into a courtroom, you have to have some verification. Right. Harassment under the statute has usually a place of employment involved. Then there's a catch-all. Interference with somebody's personal liberty is usually where that's issued. The ones where there's been a conviction have usually been with the violation of the order of protection. I haven't had you know, it's because there's not really a criminal charge for emotional abuse. There's phone harassment, there's violation of order of protection. But if someone gets an order of protection because this person is emotionally abusing them, and it says, you know, paragraph 2, they cannot enter the house, and the person's arrested at the house, that's usually how the conviction comes about.
I get that. Okay. I was
Great. That's a great question.
Yeah. Anyone else? Sherry, do you want to take over for a moment or?
No, I'm up to here on.
Okay, and you know what? Your internet is bad.
Yeah, and I know I talked really fast, and but you know, you think I get paid by the word, but I don't. But
oh, it was fabulous. I learned so many things, and things that surprised me that I thought I knew, and I knew incorrectly. So,
right.
I really appreciate your time and that you came on and gave us an education.
No, I appreciate what you do. I mean, I like, even considering the court watching procedure is very important. You know, so I'm glad that you're there. Come down. We used to have court watchers who came down to 555.
You know, there's been a couple of people talking about that. So maybe that's in the future.
Right. So obviously when the world opens up, you know, I think from if somebody, like I'm such a TV person, like there's such a show going on in front of me, but I have a different vantage point than from when I was a state's attorney, because my back would be to the court as a state's attorney, but as a judge I'm facing. And I had a woman, and this is where I want to say, thank God for Shalva. I had a woman who she was Muslim, and Opnagar was awesome. They were helping her. And one day her advocate couldn't come in, and she's sitting by on one side. And you have to think it must be really bad if she's willing to go against all of these other people. The entire other side of the courtroom was filled with, like, you know, his family and his friends. Somebody was saying something in Arabic, and the person from Shalva was in there with someone else, I think it was Israeli, and went off on them in Arabic. And I was like, what's going on? They're like, he's saying things in Arabic to her. I had to spread everybody out. And then they were so smart because Shalva took this person with them. So they knew where Opnagar would keep them, but there was no way they would ever think that Shalva would come to the rescue. And so I was like, you know, and that woman actually, that was a felony case. And it was one of the few times where the whole incident was captured on video. It was it was very difficult to watch, actually. I felt very bad for her. I don't know why he didn't plead. Like, there's, you know, and I would say I was looking, I think I'm about half and half for guilty, not guilty. Who knew? So fair, but that one was like, why are we having a trial? I mean, it was on video. I felt very bad for her.
Oh, you must have some awful stories.
Come down and visit me. I'll take you all to Manny's.
Yeah, we'll take you up on that one day. Well, thank you so much. We're running a little bit past time. I hope everybody had their questions answered and got a little smarter tonight. So I did. So thank you so much. And I learned more about Court Watch from Sherry, because I'm still learning about that. So thank you.
All right, get in touch if anybody needs anything. Please get in touch with me.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate what you're doing too. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone. Stay safe.
You too. Stay safe.
Thank you.